Hello and welcome to the National Indian Council on Aging's Effective Program Management webinar. My name's Becky Morgan, and I work as a project coordinator here at NACOA. I'm Eastern Band Cherokee and Choctaws, and thank you so much for joining us today. Our presenters have a wonderful talk planned, and we want to hear from you as well. So as an example, please share with us in the chat box your name and where you're calling in from. So for example, I'm Becky from Albuquerque. It's always neat to see all the wonderful places people are living and working from. Our organization, the National Indian Council on Aging, or NACOA, is a nonprofit that was established over 45 years ago. NACOA has been and remains dedicated to improving health, social services, and economic well-being for American Indian and Alaska Native elders. So as you see, we are a membership organization, which is pretty unusual for some of our other partners that we know of. We have our job training program, the Senior Community Service Employment Program, or CSEP, and then our DEC, which is the Diverse Elders Coalition Caregiving Project, the Tribal LTSS National Resource Center, which is the sponsor for this webinar. And then we recently completed a Centers for Disease Control Foundation project on social isolation, which was very interesting. We want to make sure that you know about our conference, which happens every 2 years. The next one is going to be next September 2023. Let's cover a few housekeeping details now. We are recording this session and will post the recording on our NACOA website within several days. You can find it at the top of the homepage by clicking the newsroom and then videos, and it'll also be posted on our LTSS Compass website. We encourage your questions always. You can type them into the chat box, or the question and answer option is also down at the bottom of your screen. And if you want to talk to us straight face-to-face or verbally, you can click the raise your hand icon and we can unmute you to ask your question. If you run into any technical difficulties, as I did this morning, please try to share them in the chat and we will do our best to troubleshoot. Sometimes the best approach is to leave the meeting and then rejoin, and for some reason that fresh start can be helpful. We always enjoy and seek your feedback, please. So join in by sharing your questions, your comments, and we can make this as fun and interactive as possible. At the end of the session, we'll post a SurveyMonkey questionnaire. It's very short and it uses an easy slider function. So you just slide from one side to the other to kind of rate the question from 1 to 100. And it should take you less than 2 minutes. And please help us improve by completing the survey. We really appreciate it. As part of the work of NACOA and with support from the Administration for Community Living, Administration on Aging, we created the Tribal Long-Term Services and Supports National Resource Center. The name we gave the project is LTSS Compass because our goal from the very beginning was to make finding your way through confusing processes and regulations easier for elders, tribal leaders, and Native communities in general. And please take a look at our website, the NACOA LTSScompass.org. I'll put the link in the chat a little bit later. The website is educational, but it also avoids rabbit holes and any confusing language. So we're real proud of it. We've presented 2 webinars on home health care and assisted living and are now doing this 3rd one on program management. Our data analyst, Desiree Lapahi, sent out a survey to tribal healthcare providers and others, and these 3 topics were the ones that they identified as most important to them. And here we've summarized some of the educational and outreach materials that Kayla Sawyer created to raise people's awareness of the new center. She has created banners that invited people to visit the website from our main website, and she developed blog posts and separate social media pages on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And over time, many have found and liked us and followed our pages. And now I want to share brief biographies of the experts that you'll be hearing from today. Jeff Kiley has 40 years of experience in the fields of education, public health, regional and community planning, grantsmanship, intercultural communications, program development, and administration. He owns a consulting company specializing in strategic planning and development for organizations, businesses, and communities. Jeff has spent most of his career living and working among the citizens of the Navajo Nation. His wife, Helen, is Navajo and is a retired teacher of Navajo language and culture. And their grown son and daughter, along with their 3 grandchildren, live in Albuquerque. Our other expert today is Larry Curley. National Indian Council on Aging Executive Director Curley is a member of the Navajo Nation with over 40 years of experience working in the aging and healthcare fields. He served as a nursing home administrator of a tribal long-term care facility and as a hospital administrator in Northern Nevada. Thank you all, and now I'll turn it over to Mr. Curley. Hi, Larry, we're not hearing you.
Thank you. I just want to welcome everyone here and to listen in and just hear about some of the things that we have experienced in our 40-some years of working in the field of aging, in the field of health and planning and so forth. And I think that's one of the things that we wanted to share with you. You know, this particular workshop, there are other workshops that have been done that talk about, you know, filling out forms, more specific parts of running an organization, making sure your budget is on target, all of that. But I think that the field of managing in an organization is much larger conceptually, philosophically, even culturally, that management is different in Indian country. There are different obstacles, there are different challenges, there are different opportunities. And those are what we want to talk about today. And I have worked with Mr. Jeff Kiley for the last 40-some years of my life in different capacities. And I've known him since the late 70s, working on some projects back in the old days, as I call it back then, when we were much younger and much more sprightly. But nonetheless, what we wanted to do is share with you in a dialogue form, back and forth, talking about some of the things that we have dealt with and how we managed to address some of those issues. And so with that, Jeff, all yours.
Well, hello, everyone, and hello from New Mexico, where we're living in turbulent times, as everyone everywhere is in different ways. Our weather here has been kind of strange. We're in the middle of a mega drought, record-setting temperatures and wildfires, and now we're in the middle of monsoons, which my wife's family call in-law chasers, but I'm still here. So happy to be here. It's really an honor to be with you all, and especially with you, Larry, and your NICOA team. I've known you for many years. We've worked together. I consider you a brother, and you're also one of my role models as a servant leader for the people. So it's really an honor to be with you. And yes, I'm looking forward to this conversation. This webinar is going to be a little bit different than many webinars you may have been on, because we're going to have a conversation and we're going to be sharing insights from our 4 decades plus of experience in different fields, particularly in the fields of serving Native people and our elders. So I'm very much looking forward to it. You can see that the holy people have honored Larry and me with white hair probably sooner than our time, because we kind of shared that feature for a long time. But we've gone the rounds. We've been involved in many things, and we're looking forward to sharing some insights with you about program management.
Thank you, Jeff. One of the things that as we talk about management and some of the things that we have done in the past um, has provided us, I think, with a foundation upon which we have worked and laid out ideas, laid out strategies, looking at different ways of how to address a particular problem. And I'm hopeful that this webinar, as we talk about it, will give people ideas about what they are capable of doing and some of the obstacles and barriers that we've encountered over the years and how we address those. Some of them were resolved, some of them still remain. And I think for those of us working in the field in Indian country, that there are problems that we have heard about 20 years ago. Some of those problems still exist 20 years later. And why is that? And those are issues that seem to keep repeating itself. And as we talk about management, there are some critical things and some basic things that I think we need to begin with. And let's talk about issues related to concepts of mission statements and so forth. And so with that, I think on the next slide, we start talking about that particular issue. So Jeff?
What I'd like to share is that many of us are working day to day in programs that involve a lot of different things, that involve a lot of paperwork, a lot of communicating, a lot of working with money. But I would like to emphasize that program management is first and foremost about people. And so that's going to be a theme that you'll be hearing from Larry and me today throughout all of these different issues, is that it's really about the people. First of all, it's about the people we serve, and making our elders and their families and their communities and their cultures and their legacies at the center of our thoughts, not on the periphery, not as an afterthought, and not as a way to get ourselves paid, but as a way for us to focus our services. And as the late Martin Luther King Jr. Used to say, keep your eye on the prize. So sometimes if we're able to keep our eyes on that vision of serving the people, it will help us get through the day-to-day difficulties of dealing with the different systems that we have to deal with in order to get our work done. So that's just the first point that I wanted to suggest, is that it's first and foremost about the people. And I'll bounce it back to you, Larry, and then we can have other ideas to share along the way.
I think that part of managing a program, managing a project, for me, it has always been, what are we doing? And do you know where you're going to? Why are you going where you're going? If you don't know where you're going, how did you know that you got there? And so those are some very basic questions that wherever I've been, I've always looked to that particular question. Do we know where we're going? Just like, for example, when I came here to the National Indian Council on Aging 3.5 years ago. And this is after a 40-year absence. I started this organization. I left the organization after 5 years, went on and did other things, ran a Head Start program, ran an alcoholism program, Division of Health, ran a hospital, nursing home, and even worked for a managed care organization and lobbied in Washington, D.C. In all of these endeavors, I thought about, where are we going? I asked that question. Do you know where you're going? When I came here to the National Indian Council on Aging, I asked staff, do you know where you're going? And as a metaphor, I identified one of the 4 sacred mountains of the Navajo Nation, Navajo people, and that's Mount Taylor. From Albuquerque is to the west of Albuquerque. And it's about maybe 78, 90 miles away to the west. And I asked staff, if you were going to Mount Taylor, that's your destination, how would you get there? And most of them said, well, you just jump on the Interstate 40, go west, and you're there. And I said, well, that's good. That's true. But there are other ways to get to Mount Taylor. You can go south on Interstate 25, go down about 70 miles to a place called Socorro, New Mexico, turn west, come up through Cuesta, Pie Town, then turn north, and you're there at Mount Taylor again. Or you can go north through Farmington. So there are a variety of ways to get to Mount Taylor. And if our destination is Mount Taylor, then how are we going to get there? And why are you going there? And so that it was creating that much larger vision of what we are supposed to be doing. And part of that was asking staff that very basic, almost abstract question. You work for the National Indian Council on Aging, you work for this particular tribe. In places that I've been, you work for this tribe. Why are you here? Why? Not just to have a job. There's got to be a bigger reason. When we all were born, we were all embedded with a purpose. It's finding that purpose. It's finding that passion. And that's the kind of staff and individuals that make up a team. And so that was my starting point, Jeff, way back when I came back to the National Indian Council on Aging and with other organizations that I worked for in the past. And how about you, Jeff?
Well, I have over the years have grown to have a greater appreciation for vision and the importance of vision and in helping us as individuals, as leaders, as servants, as servant leaders, as I described you a little bit ago, to look in terms of outcomes and results rather than just activities. So you're talking about Mount Taylor. That's the outcome. That's that, you know, and then the why of it, of course, is embedded in that outcome. You know, why did you want to get there? And so I want to give a little story of an indigenous community organization, a very strong one, with lots of resources from the feds and others. I was asked by their executive to come in and interview all of his kind of managers, you know, different programs, different parts of the community, and to say, you know, I want to know if we're on mission. You know, our founders, you know, and our elders, you know, kind of set a direction for us, and it was pretty clear. But I want to know, what are they doing to get there, and how did they think they're doing, and what plans do they have for the future to make sure that we get there? He said, I don't want them to just talk about, you know, what they're busy doing. I want to know, how are they going to help us achieve that vision, that mission of ours? I went around, and I need to tell you, Larry, it was like pulling tiger's teeth to get people to talk about outcomes. And I would ask them, well, what would it look like? Are you successful? Are you successful in what you're doing? And what would it look like if you were successful? And they struggled. Oh, they struggled. They could list 20 activities and tasks that they performed. They could talk about a dozen federal grants that they were administering. And they say, well, we got some grants and we wanted to do some things, and they gave us the funds for it. And then we did it. It got evaluated. They said we did pretty good. But they still were not able to articulate, what is it that would make you successful? So for example, diabetes. I said, is your goal, because in this community, it had one of the highest rates of diabetes in the country. And I said, is your vision to defeat diabetes in our time? Is that your bold vision? Is that what you're geared toward? And I could not even get them to bite at that as being their vision. So what I found across the board was the people were focused on their activities. Every day they were busy. Oh, they were overworked, and they needed more staff, and they needed more funding, and they needed more materials. They needed better trucks. But they had a really hard time talking about what would it look like if they were successful. If I saw your program walking down the street, what would she look like? What would she be doing if she were successful? So I just wanted to emphasize that that's a very, very important part of it, is to think in terms of results. If you're working with elders, what is it that you aspire for them? What is it that they aspire for? And how is it that your life, your team, your resources are going to be of service to that aspiration? And to not lose sight of that. I have one other story that I've shared with you before, Larry, as well. Another community, another program, I was asked to help build an adult education program in a Native community. And all of the staff that I had available to me were local Navajo people. And none of them were professionals in the kind of the typical sense, with degrees and specializations in adult education and so on. They were all just really good people, and they were bilingual, and they were well motivated. So I just loved working with them. But when we first got together, I asked them, why are you here? That question that you asked. Why are you here, and why are we here? What are we about? And their initial consensus was that we're here to teach the older people the white man's ways, because they kind of struggle with literacy, with speaking English, with understanding what's going on, with understanding what their options and opportunities are, what their resources are. So they just have a hard time with all of that. So that's what we're here for. I said, well, if that's the case, I don't know what you mean exactly by white man's way, so you have to describe those to me. And then I asked them to then compare them to what would the Navajo way be then. And we broke it down. We talked about time. We talked about human relationships. We talked about family, values, all those different kinds of things that comprise a culture, how you behave together as a group. When they got done with it, I asked, well, so what are we here for? And they had done a 180 on what they thought their vision was, or their mission. And it was now saying, we love that Navajo stuff. We just got through identifying the differences. We kind of really prefer all these Navajo ways of being and thinking and doing. And so I guess what we're doing is just working with the people to help them to realize their own potential in whatever way that they want to. And when it involves the quote, white man's ways, learning English, learning the ways of interacting with different systems, yep, that's what we do. But that's not the goal. That's not the centerpiece of what we do. It's serving the people of our culture and helping them to become even deeper and more proud of that culture, and then to expand their skills and their ability to operate in the world. So it was a wonderful experience to get people thinking about, why are we here?
Yeah, and I think that once you have developed that why, then you can then begin to go from where you want to be at the destination and work backwards. And how do you get there? That's where all of the planning, all of that kind of stuff that comes along happens. For example, when we talked about Mount Taylor in that metaphor, what was that Mount Taylor? What did it represent to us? And for me, Mount Taylor is what we are doing at the National Indian Council on Aging is that by extending the life, making the lives of our elderly better economically, physically, mentally, what are we doing? Why are we doing what we're doing? Bottom line, our elders represent the language, the culture, traditions, the spiritual songs that make us Indian people. And that our end result, our Mount Taylor, is to make sure that 5,000 years from now, tribes are still on this planet. That's what we're trying to do by doing all of the things, all of the work that we're putting into these efforts and these training programs that we are doing to make sure that that happens. And not just in the field of aging, but I think like in housing and social services, law enforcement, those are much part of that larger picture. And that's where those values of what it is that you're trying gets built into those objectives and goals, etc., as you move along, meeting some of the requirements of funding agencies and funding organizations. So that would just be my thought on the topic, Jeff. And as we move forward into the next slide, we talk about what is effective, imagining how things are done. And Jeff, your thoughts about the big pictures, the team, the budget, those types of things, as you have in your experience, how does that play into the picture?
First of all, I'm really inspired by your metaphor and the way that you have described how important that is in understanding why we are doing what we're doing. I also wanted to suggest that having alignment and integrity, that means that things hang together in a logical and supportive way. So you go from vision, once you know your vision, you talk about your mission. Your mission is this vector quality. This is why we exist. That's the outcome we're trying to reach. But our mission is to put things in motion to get there. So it's a little bit of a different statement. It says our mission is to accomplish these things so that those outcomes may be obtained. Then you go into your goals and objectives, and you just try to make sure that they're all very well aligned with each other, and that everybody understands the language of them. Doesn't have to be super fancy. Start simple, and then start putting details on them, and you can, and that will help everybody to get on board with what they're doing. So I think that that's a really important start point, is to get alignment between your vision, your mission, your goals and objectives. The second thing is to make sure that your values are explicit and shared and woven into everything that you do. So you have to sit down with your staff. You need to sit down with the elders, sit down with your tribal leaders, sit down with neighbors. And you need to talk about, what are the values that we share? What are the values that we want to operate by? What are the values inside of our organizational culture? So one of the things, Larry, that you and I have talked a lot about over the years is, what kind of culture are you building within your organization? Is it a culture of criticism and put downs and mistrust and top-down authoritarian leadership? Or is it a culture of encouragement and empowerment and mutual support and inclusion, bringing everybody along, having everybody feel a part of the vision, having everybody feel accountable to that vision? So those are really, really important things to think about. What are the values by which you will operate? How will we treat one another? How will we respect and honor everybody who's present with us, whether it's our elders in a gathering, whether it's our team, whether it's our tribal leaders or fellow administrators, how will we treat one another? How will we honor those who are present with us? And how will we honor those who are not present with us? Are we going to be gossipers and backbiters and trash talkers? Or are we going to always have model that sense of dignity and respect that we want to just embody the way that we work? So I think those are just as important, probably much more important than many of the other things we might talk about along the way, because they are sort of dependent on that culture. If you don't have a supportive, well-aligned, unified culture, it's going to be very difficult to do everything else along the way. So that's where I'd like to start, if that's helpful.
And I think that what you were just mentioning, Jeff, just brought to mind that, in tribal communities across the country, and specifically in my case, the way I was raised from a father who was very traditional, who used to say to us, "You're no better and you're no worse than anybody else." That in that process, that you respect other people, that you treat them equally, that not just other people, but the ground that you walk on, the plants that you see, the animals that you see, they are all equal. And so, one of the things I've thought about many, many years back is that I've taken that concept. People should just look at that concept of equality, treating people with dignity and respect. And that in that process, it creates a balance. This is taking a tribal value into the field of management, that you treat people with respect. You give them an opportunity to grow. That's why you're here, because if you grow them, you make sure that 5,000 years from now, tribes are still here with the same values of respect, dignity, equality, balance, all of that. Those are tribal values that can be infused into the concept of management. You can talk about time management. There are workshops galore out there. There are workshops on budget finances. There are all kinds of workshops. But I think from a tribal indigenous perspective, that we need to start talk about manage from a traditional native perspective, and that much bigger picture of treating people with one another. Too often, many times where I have worked in Indian country, there is that concept of, it's a punitive kind of a world out there sometimes, that, you didn't do your job, I'm going to write you up. That is not an environment where people grow. You need to have people that you give them the opportunity to try new things. Change is always difficult, but try new things. And you know what? We're going to blow it every once in a while. We're going to make mistakes, but you should learn from those mistakes. And a leader in that position should be able to say, it's okay. What did you learn from that mistake? And so that, I think, in terms of the Native American community and taking our values, our tribal values, and embedding it in how we do our management. We have all kinds of, when I was going through grad school, we talked about management styles. There's the autocratic manager, there's the enlightened, charismatic managers. That's out there. There's books on that. But how do we do it from a Native perspective? So I just thought I'd share my thoughts with you on that, Jeff.
I'd like to piggyback on that a little bit. One of my closest brother friends, Cherokee man Mac Hall, started a program way back 35 years ago or so, and I was part of it. He was on my team in adult and vocational education at the time, but he started a whole new initiative called the National Indian Youth Leadership Project. And I think the reason, the impetus for that, the motivation for that was seeing the need to reintegrate cultural values into the lives of young people, but to do so in a way that was relevant to today, that was responsive to the conditions of today, to give them a strong cultural foundation, but then to be able to relate it to the world that they were living in. And it's, as you know, Larry, it's still going strong. But one of the very first things we worked on was what are what you might call universal indigenous values that we understand from our elders and the teachings that have been brought forward. What are they? And then how can we articulate them for young people at this time? And it has turned out to be a very, very successful program. Obviously, you need to borrow management ideas and leadership ideas and office process ideas from all kinds of places. But at your core is that desire to keep a strong cultural pulse just pounding in the heart of the people that you're working with. And I think Mac has done a marvelous job of that. I think you have a knowledge of his program and what it has been seen to be on a national scale, haven't you?
Yes, as a matter of fact, SAMHSA has recognized that particular project of Max as one of the only SAMHSA's evidence-based programs in Indian country to deal with mental health issues for our young people. So it's gotten the data necessary to qualify it as a evidence-based program. So that's a heck of a designation and then recognition of the success of a program similar to that is Native inspired. So I think that as we talk about this, we're talking about the big picture and the larger picture of managing, that there are resources that are available. There are people on your team. And I know that when you and I were working together, when I was working for the Navajo Nation, you talked a lot about how we could do economic development, for example, in the northwest part of New Mexico. And you had a team that you put together. And that team, from my perspective, was absolutely awesome in how they worked together. And what were some of the things that you looked at when you were putting this team together, Jeff?
In that experience of working on a regional basis, in which fully 1/2 of the whole population was indigenous, either Navajo or Zuni, and half of the land base was native reservation or native based lands. What a challenge to get these two cultural systems, political systems, bureaucratic systems, economic systems to talk to each other and to be mutually supportive without having to lose the strength of the value of either side. Is a very big challenge. And one of the ways that we went about it is that we realized that teamwork was the essence. Teamwork, not just among my team, but reaching across to other agencies, other organizations, so that we became more of a convener and a facilitator and a listener. And when we heard some common ground, we tried to lift that up and say, see, it's not that hard. We've got some common ground. You and I will be talking a little bit later in this program about some of these examples of ways that you can work across borders and so on. But initially, you need to you need to have that posture of listening. And I'm glad that you brought that up. That's what our team learned to do, is instead of entering into every conversation with preconceived notions and with these outside models, Western models, if you want to call them that, you enter in with a posture of learning and a posture of listening. And as you listen, what you're doing is you're looking for those areas of agreement, those areas of collaboration that you can find. And when you find those, you achieve a much higher level of energy from that. You attract new resources when you're working together. And we found out, and as probably many of your program managers on this call have found out, is that funders, both from the philanthropic sector and from the government sector, they don't want to fund individual programs as much anymore. They want to fund collaborations. They want to fund partnerships. They want to fund initiatives that show different people working together. And so that's what we tried to do in every respect. And economic development, it's a real tough one, because according to certain models of economic development, it's much more of an outside-in process. And so what we needed to do was cultivate an awareness of the inside-out process. How do you get people to stop thinking about how poor they are or how needful they are as a community, and get them to thinking about what are our assets and what are the strengths we have to grow on. I'll refer real quickly another little story with, again, my brother Mac. When we were working together, we got fed up with writing all these, but we were pretty successful grant writers, but it felt like we were always kind of crying in our soup and feeling like the community was saying, we don't have this, we don't have that, we need this, we need that. And the group of Navajo leaders we were working with got pretty fed up with that, and they said, that's not us. We need to say, we're here, we have survived, we are good, we are strong, we have values, we have land, we have each other, and we want to do some things better. We want to build better from that base. And you, federal program A, federal program B, nonprofit C, we'd like to invite you to join in, participate with us, bring some resources. Let's see what we can do together. So we wrote a proposal with that spirit. So it was no longer, we didn't even bother to say we have unemployment of X and we have a poverty rate of, so-and-so. We didn't talk about any of that. We just talked about what was good, what was beautiful, what was strong, what our vision was, and what we thought would be an adaptive type of program that would fit the community as well as draw resources from the outside. And we kind of sent it in thinking that they were just going to trash the proposal because it was not in the same vein as other proposals. It got ranked number 2 in the country and got fully funded for 3 years. So that's just an example of how, if you've got vision, if you embrace your culture, your assets, the good things about what you want to do as a people, you can be proactive and you can reach out and you can invite people to participate with you. It's a different mindset, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And I think that that's where the kind of a lot of pride and assertiveness about your culture, your language, your history comes in. And when you start thinking in that way, you come up with more creative, innovative ideas that maybe doesn't fit the larger society's vision of what's needed out there. But you have the opportunity to say, what happened in Cincinnati, Ohio, what they came up with, that particular model, if you apply it here, it's not going to work. If we come up with our own model here in, let's say, Cherokee, North Carolina, that model is going to work for Cherokee, North Carolina, but it's not going to work for Suquamish in Suquamish, Washington. And so that each culture is different. They have different ways of looking at and how it could be done. And if they look at, as you're saying, their strength, the positive sides of things, each one of them will come up differently. But there's that whole, as you were saying earlier, that universal concept of equality, pride, and a lot of, in my mind, it is the whole idea of resilience. We've been here from time immemorial. I hear that all the time. We've been here and we want to keep on being here. And I think that that's some of the things that from our perspective at the NICOA, that's what we look at is we want to make sure we continue to be here. And how do we do that? Because it's our elders that have that history, that language, that culture, and those traditions. So, but as you were saying, we have some other things that we need to talk about, and part of that is as you said, we're going to be talking about budgets later on, and how does that fit into the picture of getting things done. So, I think on the next slide, we talk about resources. We find these resources, and there's always that idea with every resource that comes in, whether it be coming from the philanthropic environment, from a governmental resource and funding. They talk about sustainability. How are you going to sustain this project after the funds run out? And I know that, Jeff, you have some ideas and some thoughts on that because you've gone through a lot of those kinds of experiences of trying to figure out how to continue a program after the resources have ran out.
It's, I think, Larry, it's about, when you read some of the material coming out of the Harvard project, the Native American Economic Project, and you read all of the different papers and research documents that Native academics have come up with, they all point to the concept of sovereignty as being very important, not just the political sovereignty, not just as a buzzword, but as almost a spiritual and cultural concept that can define even the newborn baby, can define every individual within a family and within a community, and there are just various facets, like a beautiful diamond, to what sovereignty means. And one of the meanings of sovereignty is that you are independent in your thought, independent in your understanding of yourself in the universe, but that you are interdependent, and that you then approach relationships, as you were saying, in more of an equality framework rather than a dependency framework. So that's the way that I began learning more about sovereignty, is that it means at every level, not being dependent on somebody else, something else for your own well-being. Yes, you can be interdependent, you can share resources, you can rely upon each other, you can cooperate with each other. I can help build your house. You can come over and you can help build my house. So it's an interdependence, but you're not dependent. I'm not always leaning on you. You're not always leaning on me, but we stand strong in ourselves. And because we stand strong in ourselves, now we can reach out. Now we know who we are. So when we're shaking hands with somebody outside of our borders, for example, we know who we are that is shaking that hand. We know where we're coming from. So when somebody says, well, so what does your community want to do? Or what does it need? Or what are its goals? What resources are it looking for? You know what those are, because you know who you are and you know where you stand. And then on the other side, they can say, well, that gives us confidence that you know what you're doing. And so we're ready to invest with you. We're ready to participate with you. So I think that's a core concept of sustainability, is that you try to establish as much as possible that sense of being sovereign and independent as a team, as a group, as a community. Then when you look at sustainability, you're looking at what other resources will we proactively seek to meet our objectives, to meet our goals, our needs, to plant in our soil. And you go out and you find those and you bring them in. But if you are going day to day, just say, waiting for a grant to come through, waiting for an RFP to be announced, waiting for the tribal council to deliver you your budget, that is not going to build your sustainability because you remain dependent on these processes that are happening outside of you. I don't know if I'm being clear in getting that across, but I think the core of sustainability means that you're always on the outlook for resources that will continue you forward. The Navajo medicine man talks about the hogan and talks about everything that goes into the making of the hogan. And he talks very much about how he needs to look at the year, the seasons of the year. He needs to be prepared for the winter. He starts getting ready in the summertime and in the fall for the winter time. He thinks about the need for planting in the spring. He doesn't start in the spring. He starts in the fall and the winter to plan for the spring. And if we can kind of draw upon that cultural knowledge base, that cultural experience, that wisdom, then I think it can be kind of the foundation of our sustainability. I think in a moment or two, there's an indigenous model that I worked on with some indigenous planners in the past that we can also refer to talk about how it's almost a universal concept about how we can look at this stuff.
I agree, Jeff. And I think one of the things that when I used to talk about sustainability, a lot of times we're afraid to talk about our programs. Talk about it out there so that people are aware of what your program is doing, what you're trying to do, what your end goals are, what your vision is, to be able, if you don't know where you're going, why you're going there, how are you going to articulate it at a level where people are going to say, I really like that. I want to buy into it. And that's that proactive side that you're talking about. And that whole process of sustainability is, how are you going to figure out where to go after this is done? And I used to say to staff when I was working for the Navajo Nation, between our ears, we have this big, massive gray matter. And, I looked down on the ground and there's these little bitty creatures. They're all red and they're all running around, in the summertime. And they're bringing little seeds, little pieces of bread, weeds or food, taking it into the little holes on the little mounds that they make, taking it inside. Those little guys, they're called ants, are already preparing for winter. And they don't have as much of that gray matter as we do, but we should be doing that, starting to think about the future, where we go. And if you have that vision, if you have the mission to accomplish that vision, you have the goals, you have the objectives to accomplish that vision, it should be something that you can follow through on. But I do agree. I think that there's some other areas where you did talk about, where we talked about the traditional way of looking at that whole process. I think that's on the next slide.
Becky, thank you. Larry and I have both had a lifelong experience learning from our elders, learning from the medicine people of the Navajo Nation and of other nations. And we have learned some kind of universal concepts that you can kind of look across the different tribal nations. You can also relate it to what you might call the more Western or academic approaches to program development and so on. And so I thought that we might spend a moment or two taking a look at that. In the in the Navajo way, there is, and in most native traditions, almost all native traditions, there is this sense of the cardinal directions and of the east and the south and the west and the north, and that certain values and processes are embedded in those directions. And so as we take a look at the whole process, we look to the east, to this whole process of planning, setting your vision. In most traditions, you're talking about prayer and meditation. You're talking about finding this place of humility and balance to begin with. You're not entering into the process of doing things in a scattered, superficial mode. You have deepened yourself. You have set the stage, so to speak, for entering into the world of action. And then as you move to the south, you're talking about preparing for the doing of things. You're talking about the gathering, the organizing, and the initiating of things. And it's a universal process. It's difficult to have coherent action if you don't have a good plan, and if you have not prepared properly. So then you move from the preparation, you move into act. And that's on the Western side, the action, which is about building and making and create. It's about healing. It's about that active process of going through the healing. It's about travel. This is where the activity of life is. And as you then move into the north, you might say that the east was also the place of the dawn, and the south was the place of the morning, the west was the place of the day, and then the north was the place of the evening or the night. And that's where you reflect. You have done your planning, you've done your preparation, you've acted in the world, and now you sit down with your meal, with your family, with your friends and your neighbors, and you reflect on the day. What were your new discoveries? Where did things go wrong? Where did that log fall off of the hogan and you put it on wrong? You grow your knowledge base. You say, well, what did we learn? What did we learn today from our experience? You tell stories. You kind of make your day part of the story of your life and of your family. And then you evaluate, how did we do? How, did we proceed in the right way? Were we efficient and effective? Did we work well together? Did we have all the supplies we needed? Was our plan the right plan, or did we have to change it along the way? And having done that, then you then go to sleep and then wake up the next morning and you go back into that process with finding your vision, praying for guidance, finding that humility and balance, and then moving back through the cycle. So I have found great inspiration from this model and have enjoyed sharing it with many teams. And it seems to be very applicable, even people from the kind of the academic side or the Western models look at it and say, makes sense to us. It's a different way of putting it all together. So I don't know, is this a good place to kind of take a break, let people take a 5 or 10 minute break and then reflect a little bit, and then we can come back and talk about kind of the preparing and action phase and then the reflection phase that we've been pointing to. What do you think?
I guess, Becky, is a 10-minute break sufficient?
I think that's probably enough for everyone, a little break and come back and be refreshed and keep going. This is really great, both of you. Jeff, I wanted to make sure you mentioned the Harvard project. Is that the one called Honoring Nations that you're talking about self-governance?
Yeah, I believe that's the umbrella kind of name of the effort, yes.
Okay, I'll look that up and put it in the chat. And so everybody, let's try to get back about 10 after 12. That's Mountain Time. I guess it's 2 o'clock Eastern Time, 10 after 2. All right. Thanks, everybody. See you in a little bit. Hi, everybody. I think our clocks may be a little bit different on different places, but I think we're about back to 10 after. Jeff, I'm having a hard time sending you that material right now, but I hope you'll
That's
be all
okay.
right. Okay. All right. Well, thank you. Welcome back, everybody. Did we want to continue with this slide?
Sure.
Okay.
Larry, you're muted.
I think we've covered, I think from a traditional Native perspective, some of the things that go into developing actions, developing the vision, evaluating the programs at the end in the cardinal direction, which a lot of tribes, I think, understand utilizing that circular approach to program development, and just even in terms of some of the spiritual ceremonies that go on. And so I think that maybe we should go moving on into the next section. Becky.
Second. I stopped sharing and now I'm having a hard time. Forgive me. Okay, is that working?
Yes.
Okay.
Great.
I think part of what we have been talking about from the very beginning in this whole presentation has been developing a program, looking at what it is that where are you going? All of that, everything that we have talked about up to this point points to leadership. What is it that makes a good leader? What is it about that particular individual or individuals in a community that help shape that vision, and how they have a role in developing that vision, that role is embedded in the concept of equality and balance and understanding tribal culture, and being assertive and strong enough to say, this is what we need, this is what we want. And so I think that in that whole area, a lot of people have a lot of different ideas about being a leader. And, it's a very difficult concept to understand what makes a good leader. One of the things that I have a little story about that. I remember one time I was talking about art with my daughter, who's an artist, and she went through the Institute of American Indian Art in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And so she's an artist, and she got her BFA from the Chicago School of Fine Art. And as we're talking about art, I said, I would like to see if I can still paint and draw like I used to. And she said, I can do that, Dad. I can do that very easily. I can show you how to mix the paints, what the qualities of the different paints are, how to stretch the canvas so that it doesn't mess up the painting that you're doing. I can teach you all of that, and some of the theories behind color and integration of color. But unless you have it in you, inside of you, you will never paint a Mona Lisa. And I think that a lot of times I look at leadership in that fashion, is that it's all of these things that you have been taught about who you are as an individual, as an Indian person, and some of those values and some of those cultural concepts that are in you now, because it's been you've been told so many times, it's made it a part of your life that you move almost naturally to that particular position. And there are Western concepts of leadership that sometimes I look at and I think, no, that's not the way I see it. That's not the way I view leadership. And so those are things that we deal with. And there are different things that are part of being a leader in that concept. In the Indian country, we have leaders out there that people go, oh, he doesn't even know where he's going, or she doesn't know what she's doing. Oh, that one's a good one. Knows where she's taking our tribe. And that person has a vision. That person knows where they want to take the tribe. And back in the old days when I first started in the field, they used to say, if you were to ask somebody, who are the great tribal leaders today? Automatically, I would hear names like Wendell Chino, Peter McDonald, Roger Jourdain, Joe Dela Cruz. Automatically, people will come up with names. And today, it's really quite fragmented, because I think that times have changed and requires different kinds of tribal leadership out there that can respond to certain things. Those leaders of yesterday were the ones who I see laid the foundation for who we are today as tribes across this country. But anyway, that's just my thought on that, Jeff. And maybe you have a different perspective. I would like to hear that.
I think my perspectives, I've learned a lot from working in Indian country for most of my career. Before that, I worked in East Africa. So I've not spent most of my time out in these in the what you might call the dominant culture, but I've had to interact with it all of this time and to learn from it. And of course, my background and upbringing and so on gave me a few tools to be able to understand it, and then to be able to adapt it and translate it for application by people in local communities. So that's been kind of my path, I guess you might say. And one thing I wanted to highlight is that what you might call the dominant society, the Western-based society that surrounds all of our communities, one of its central themes is what I call competition or contest. Whereas in most tribal communities I've been familiar with, the core value is not contest or competition, but cooperation and collaboration, communion, and shared leadership, shared responsibility, shared accountability. And again, my friend Mac Hall studied this issue extensively as he built the National Indian Youth Leadership Project, and identified those qualities of leadership that he found from speaking with Cherokee elders and with elders across the country. And he agrees with that they are two different paradigms, two different worldviews, ways of looking at things. And so I think in the tribal context of working with programs, I often encourage people to take a look at moving more toward the cooperative model and modeling that even to people in outside communities, even people who are hyper competitive, because the cooperation model is actually stronger. The competition model is more aggressive, but the cooperation model is stronger, and we talk about sustainability, it's longer lasting. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, you go together, right? So I think that all of these different issues that we talk about within leadership, decision making, how do you manage conflict between people and groups? How do you reach agreement together? How do you foster an environment in which people enjoy working and are very productive and creative? The way that you deal with motivation. Do you deal only from the outside in, throw a little bit more money at it, pat people on the back, or is that motivation built into just the way that you work with everybody. And then inspiration, are you inspirational? So I think that with all of those things, even decision making, eventually, yes, if you're a leader, people are going to look to you to help lead, to help give direction. I think in our tribal communities, it works best when that's based on, again, the cooperative model of listening to various points of view, of listening to the people most affected, of listening to the people on your team, the people you depend on to get things done. But then they are going to look to you and say, okay, you have wisdom, experience, and skill in putting things together and knowing how to move things forward. What do you want us to do? Then you can lead, then you can certainly give that direction. But it's done in a let's go together mode. Let's go to Mount Taylor together now. And I've heard from all of you, Coach, so this is how we're going to do it. We're not going by car or truck, we're going by horseback. You know,
Yep.
because there are other things we want to do along the way that you can't do, you know, using these other means.
And I think, you know, in that regard, Jeff, one of the things that I've thought about many times is that, you know, as you become a leader, not because you say you are, it's the community that says you are. They recognize those qualities in you, which has been imbued by whatever, whoever you heard and listened to. And that's what the community sees. And they say, you lead us. It's by consensus that you are that leader. You know, I am not in a position, you know, being who I am, to say, hey, yeah, I'm a leader. I can't say that. That would be arrogant. That would be selfish in a lot of ways. But if people say, Larry, you seem to know what you're talking about, help us to find a way. And I think one of the things that you mentioned in one of our discussions is how a tribal leader that you worked with years ago with the Navajo Nation, who sat down and said, let's figure out a way that we can motivate people, not only from within the tribe, but outside the tribe, non-Indian entities, to bring it all together. And maybe you could share that particular story as well, Jeff.
I would love to share that. Larry, speaking of the Honorable Dr. Taylor Mackenzie, who was the first certified, qualified medical physician of the Navajo Nation. And later in his life, he was asked, in the way that Larry just talked about, he was asked to run for leadership of the Navajo Nation. He became the vice president. In the course of his work, he saw that the Navajo Nation was in a context of interface with the outside world at these critical nodal points called cities. We call them border towns where we live. And in each of these border towns, there were all kinds of issues that were the result of the clash of cultures, of conflicts between ways of doing things, perceptions, power struggles, economic relationships that were sometimes very exploitative. And he saw that if we are going to thrive, then we need to find a way to forge a common bond with our neighbors. For one thing, Flagstaff and Gallup are half Navajo anyway. But we need to really start forging this relationship. He had a Good Neighbors initiative, and he himself led that initiative. And one of the things that he wanted to do was address the issue of substance abuse, alcohol abuse, public intoxication, and so on, that was so visible in these border town communities, because the Navajo Reservation was a dry jurisdiction on which liquor could not be sold. Lots of bootlegging continued to happen, and people accessed alcohol, but it was illegal. And so it was pretty dry that way. But all of these border towns had lots and lots of liquor and lots of people ready and willing to purvey it to those who asked for it. So he asked me to work with him on this initiative, and we put together a summit of all of the mayors and other leaders from these border towns, as well as Navajo community leaders and so on, and experts in the field of substance abuse and so on. It was a fantastic, it was about the year 2000 or so, and it was held in Farmington. And I learned in that process how Dr. McKenzie worked. He was always very quiet and humble, and yet when he spoke, everybody listened, including the mayors. There was one mayor in particular who was very much a part of the non-native community, who would refer to those people, the ones who were on the streets, the ones who were struggling, the ones that were being locked up for causing a problem, being drunk and so on. And he would be, he looked at things that way. By the end of this process, he became a very close friend with Dr. McKenzie. And Dr. McKenzie took him to some Navajo ceremonies, introduced him to grandmothers and grandfathers, introduced him to little kids, to community leaders. By the end of the process, this same person was referring to those people as my relatives. That's the kind of transformational leadership that each of us has the potential to provide. It's servant leadership. It's in service to a higher goal, a higher vision. And it can create, well, what would you call it? You might call it magic. When people who have had antagonistic worldviews all of a sudden find a way to come together and do something in common. And as an outgrowth of this summit that we put together, a whole new organization was created, equally led by the Navajo Nation and the cities. So that, I think that's a really good model and example.
And I remember you telling me that, and I was like, wow, it took a lot of strength, a lot of courage to take that initiative. And this is where the whole idea of, I think what I find so many times is in Indian country where I've worked, that we get so obsessed with staying within our own borders, within our own tribal lands, within our own departments, within our own programs, that we silo ourselves right out of business. That there could be, in terms of developing those relationships that could help with the sustainability issue, for example, that by being siloed, not only as a tribe, but as a department or a program, we lose out on many opportunities. And what you were just talking about in terms of Dr. McKenzie is looking beyond the rest, beyond tribal land. And because there are people out there that could work with you, who want to work with you, but don't know how to work with you. And obviously there are people out there who have that antagonistic view. But it's your turn as a leader to work that magic, to transform that individual into being a cooperative and coordinating individual that you can work with. And so I think that this is where, in terms of your positions that you've held, I know that when you were as the executive director of the Northwest New Mexico Councils of Government, you worked with mayors from the different cities in Northwest New Mexico, county managers, board of commissioners, 3 tribes, Navajo, Zuni, and Acoma. They were all a part, and you worked with them. And that was how, from that position that you held, how you developed that. And so I think that this is something that would be very good to share with the people that are out there.
I'll give one example. I may not have even shared this with you before, Larry, but there was a good example of wanting to approach one of the Pueblo communities. And it was, we had some funding and we wanted to offer an opportunity to participate, work with us within that regional project. And I believe the project had to do with both economics and water, water supply and a cross-boundary issue, water. And we did what we thought, we did everything we thought was right. We planned it out, we put timelines together. We went to visit the tribal leaders and we were put in our place. I even had Navajo staff who were put in their place at this Pueblo government. And they basically said, if you want to have that conversation and if you want to create a partnership, then there are certain ways of doing things here that you need to follow. You don't just go to the tribal chairman. You don't just go to the tribal council, do a presentation, and walk out with a piece of paper with somebody's signature on it. It took us an entire year of relationship building. But it was one of the most treasured, precious experiences of my life to be put in that position of humility. And for that tribal leadership to be interfacing with this outside agency, outside world, saying, hey, we know who we are. And we know we will invite you in, but you need to honor who we are as you do so. And did we get things done right away? No. Did we get a lot of project objectives check marked off? No. Did we spend a lot of money that we were supposed to spend? No, we didn't. But in the long run, it was a much better process and the relationships were strong. I'd like to also offer another example having to do with water, something that you and I have talked a lot about. It's one of the biggest infrastructure projects in the Western states of the last 20 years. It's called the Navajo Gallup Water Supply Project. It was way back in the 50s that the engineers, everybody that knew about water, said the only way the Navajo Nation and the communities of its eastern side are going to have water and even survive is if we try to pull some water out of the river and bring it down into those communities, and Gallup would be at the other end of that from the San Juan River. Gallup would benefit, but all of the communities in between would benefit as well. And that's the only way to do it. That was in 1957. It's in the congressional record that was the recommendation, 1957. Well, it was 35 years later, after some studies that went bad, after some plans that were made that the city fathers of Gallup and the Navajo Nation leadership couldn't agree on, and it tanked, that Senator Domenici came to us and said, could you, let's get this going. Could you convene an interagency, intergovernmental group? And let's get this going. Well, it took 17 years before President Obama signed off on the big federal legislation that authorized the project, $1.5 billion and more now to get this done. It was an incredible project that was transformative, because one of the things that we had to do when things got stuck is we had to draw a triangle. Said, here's the Navajo Nation, here's the city of Gallup. In this case, there's the Jicarilla Nation. They had water rights in this whole system. And we had to begin listing what are the different goals and interests of each of these groups. And what are their fears of what might go wrong? Why would they be blocking ideas? Why would they be protecting themselves and mistrusting others? Once we got that conversation done, and all out on the whiteboard, all out in front of everybody, the project took off like a dam whose gates had been opened. And eventually we got her done. And along the process, there was this thing happening between the city of Gallup and the Navajo Nation, where Gallup sat surrounded by Navajo communities. And for years and years and years and years, the city of Gallup said, we can't give you guys any water. We can't share our water. It's municipal water supply. You're outside of our city limits. We can't share any water with you. There was even a golf course, and right next to the golf course, a number of Hogans and Navajo homesteads that had no running water. And there was a golf course right next door. So with Senator Bingham's help and the Indian Health Service and Navajo Nation leadership, new City of Gallup leadership, got everybody to the table. And all of a sudden they said, we could do that. And they put together a project, brought water to those people bordering on the golf course. And that was the springboard for an entire change of mindset, where Gallup said, hey, we're part of a water commons of which the Navajo Nation and its communities are a part. And in this water commons, we need to figure out a way to share the resource. So we will become, since we've got infrastructure, we've got water pipes and we've got pumps and everything, we've got a water treatment plant, we will be the hub. Bring the water down to us, get the water to the communities along the way. And then once the water gets to us, we will then distribute that water to all of our neighboring communities. It was a paradigm shift. You could feel the earth shake beneath our feet. So I just wanted to use that as another example of how previous barriers to collaboration between tribal and non-tribal entities and communities can find a way forward.
And I think that as part of this discussion, I think, there's the reality out there, as you know, Jeff, is that there are sometimes difficult relationships to work on, based on race, discrimination, historical issues. And those are things that we deal with. We know there's a level of mistrust out there between the larger world and tribal communities. And how do we begin to break through that level of mistrust? And because if we really want to go to Mount Taylor, we have to do what's necessary to bring those views together and work out ways that we can work together. It might not work. I mean, years ago, when I was in Washington, D.C., advocating for the passage of Title VI of the Older Americans Act, I went to, at that time, Congressman William Cohen from Maine. And I said, this is what we want. And he said, no problem, Larry. It's something that is in my heart to take care of older people. And since there are older American Indians out there, my support is there for you. But when I returned back to my board to tell them this is who I'm working with, and the comment that was made was, don't work with him. He's a racist. And the reason why they said that was because back in those days, some of the tribes in Maine were trying to get back some of their land. So we need to differentiate the issues. And he was not supportive of the land issue, but he was supportive of the elderly issues. And so we were able to carve out just the aging issue and not bring the land issue into those discussions. And he became an ardent supporter of that piece of legislation. So it's getting to know who the people are, what is it they believe, and working with them in that particular fashion. I know that in the work that we do, we go to these meetings and we find people who are directors of area agencies on aging that are on outside of the tribe, who really want to know how to work with tribes and be of help to the tribes and improve the lives of our Indian elders. They want to know. And I think that this is where there are people who do want to work with us. And so we should take that opportunity. And even with those that we have not talked with, we should go out and search them, find them. You know, we talk about tribal sovereignty. You can develop a relationship with a state unit on aging, for example, and still preserve your tribal sovereignty and protect your tribal sovereignty. And so it's that understanding of what is it that we're trying to do and why are we here, and going back to finding the kind of a leader that can take us down that path and get it accomplished. And so when we start talking about beyond the tribal boundary, let's look beyond our own departments. And I think part of what this particular project is supposed to do is to enable tribes, not only internally, but from an internal perspective, to develop programs that meet the needs of our elderly, that meets the entire mental, physical, spiritual side of their lives. And that's called long-term services and support. If we can get social services, the health clinic, the elderly program, law enforcement, maybe even the Head Start program, to sit down and talk to one another, we can come up with a comprehensive service delivery system for our elders at the tribal level. And where those resources are missing, let's go outside the tribe and see what's out there that we can bring into the fold so that we have a comprehensive and productive discussion about how we can help one another in this process. And so I think that's what this particular webinar is trying to do, is to think outside of, filling out that SF 424 and the OMB circular form, whatever. That's not what this is about. But what we're trying to do, what you and I are talking about, are things is real, is practical. That's the real world, a larger picture of what we can do as organizations providing services to our elderly population and even to children for that matter, because the bottom line of where are we going, the Mount Taylor, is the preservation of Indian tribes 5,000 years into the future. If we can keep our eye on that target, I think we can accomplish a lot, Jeff.
I really agree with that. I'd also, you have shared with me, many of my mentors have shared with me the Navajo philosophical concept of and I don't think there's any English word that captures it all. I call it relationshipness. It talks about the relations between people clan-wise. It talks about relations between people and other people, other five-fingered ones. It talks about relationships with creation, with the earth, with the universe. So it's a very deep, powerful concept. But one of the ways that I like to see it being applied is that you extend the circle of Ke, so that you begin to see others outside of your boundaries, outside of your program, outside of your family, those people outside of whatever circle you're operating within, you begin to see a relationship with them. You begin to include them in Ke. You begin to understand that we're all in this together. We are one humanity. We have different places we come from. We have different bonds. We have different ways of looking at things and doing things, but we are one humanity. And with that, I don't want to just stay at that philosophical level. I want to suggest that one way to apply that is to always be seeking to build relationships with everybody who could impact upon what it is that you're doing. If you're a program manager, and I really like what you said about, for example, early childhood within the community, why couldn't there be a powerful partnership between the early childhood program and the senior services program. And I know in a number of communities there is. And sometimes the elders are called upon to work with and teach the young children. Sometimes the children are called upon to serve the elders. And boy, does that build character and build cultural identity and so on to do so. So also working from within a tribal program and then looking to the state program, the county programs, local cities and municipalities, these non-governmental organizations, some of which are very effective and some of which are double-edged swords. But you need to establish these relationships first. And I know my wife Helen, who was a teacher, used to say that in this one local Navajo school, there were a lot of teachers that were brought in from other places, Indiana, Cincinnati, as you talked about, different places, good kids, young people, good smarts, a good motivation, but they would come into a classroom and all the kids just sit there with their arms folded with no expression on their face. And these teachers would get frustrated. What do I have to do to? And Helen and I would hold some training courses with them where we'd say it's about relationships. Until you become part of their they don't know if they can trust you. They don't know if they can trust your knowledge. They don't know if they want to learn from you. What do you have to teach me? We don't even know who you are. Who's your mother? Where do you come from? And once they learned that, and they started to look at relationship building as the foundation of their teaching, everything changed. Again, the magic. So I just think that that's one of the things that can happen from the programs we're working within to reaching out beyond ourselves is bring them into your circle, listen to what their needs are, listen to what their perspectives are, share your own, and then lead the conversation forward because you're the one that knows what you're doing and where you're going.
Exactly. I think one of the things you just mentioned in terms of grandma teaching young kids in a school setting. I don't know if New Mexico is the first state in the country to pass a law just in this last session that would pay grandmas to teach tribal culture in schools. And so, that's a fantastic step forward in that whole process of bringing young people, older people together in a classroom setting and be paid to do that. And so I think that's an important development, especially here in New Mexico, because they have been talking about that for years, just like the water project that you mentioned earlier. And I think that there are other states in the country that could do the same thing, Arizona, North Dakota, South Dakota, Washington. Those states could think about that and begin to see how we can begin to integrate our young people back with our older people. That's part of that thinking, the larger purpose of where we are going, why we're doing what we're doing. So I think that beyond the tribal boundary lines, it's not just the tribal areas, but I think it's also looking at what can we do beyond ourselves with other programs. And so with that, I think maybe we should move on to the next slide, Jeff.
I know we have just a few minutes left, but I wonder, Larry, if we could spend just a couple of minutes on the 800-pound gorilla in the room, which is money.
Yep.
And then that'll lead right into how do we reflect on everything. You and I have talked about budget building and how, and again, we don't want to talk about how you fill out the forms, but the mental approach should be for program managers to become extremely knowledgeable and aware of what your value is, where you're going, what it's going to take for you to get there, and use that as your basis for moving into the budget process. And so that, again, you are proactive and you are using financial resources to help you accomplish your goals, to hire people, to purchase things, to get a car that works, all those kinds of things. It's about that mental approach. and you and I have talked about this, how money can be a double-edged sword also. Sometimes the money itself becomes the source of conflict. It actually deteriorates capacity rather than building it, because people fight over it
Yep.
and you get power conflicts.
And
And so we would counsel people to not let the money undermine the integrity of your vision, of your culture, and what you want to accomplish. Just wanted to mention that before we move forward.
Well, I appreciate that, Jeff, because it reminded me of my experience years ago when I was a graduate student at the University of Arizona. I had some friends who were members of another tribe who were working. These young people were working like crazy to get federal recognition by the federal government, and so that was their whole thing. That's what they wanted to do. And after I left school and went off to do my work, years later, I ran across one of them. And by that time, they had achieved what they wanted to do. And I said, so how is it going? Congratulations on you guys getting federal recognition. And so how's it going? And then his response to me was, it's the worst thing we could have ever done. And I said, why? That's what you wanted. He says, you know what, Larry? When we were poor and forgotten, we took care of ourselves. We looked after each other and we cared about each other. But now we got this federal recognition, the money starts coming in, and people are fighting over those funds, and has divided families. It has fractured the communities, and it's something that we should never have done. And that was his comment. And I was surprised. But then, not really, I guess, when you think about what money does. Money has a tendency of doing that. And so be careful. That's all we can say at this point, is make sure that money is not what is the driving force in your community.
I second that emotion, and I also think we've waxed philosophical in a way, but this is kind of where we wanted to be in this webinar, is to raise the questions and the issues and maybe some insights to help people recontext their role as managers within their communities. One of the ways that we can make sure that what we're doing is on track is through this reflection process, sometimes called evaluation. And it's all about learning and improving. So if you have a culture of learning within what you're doing, then evaluations at the end of the year are no big deal, because you've been learning all the way along. And then you're just categorizing them and cataloging them and logging them in and letting other people know what you did well, what you didn't do so well, what you learned from it, and what others might be able to learn from you. That's where best practices can come from in Indian country, is from what we ourselves are learning and what we share with our other programs and other communities. And one thing that we've talked about is something that the great Navajo thinker Larry Emerson used to tell me. Is he used to talk to me about the ethics of data, that outside evaluators and also outside academics, outside researchers often come into our communities. They extract information, they extract perceptions from us, and then they leave, they get their PhDs, they get rich off of the books they write, but that data is never owned by us in the community who actually gave the information and about whom all that information was generated. And so I think that was one of the key points we wanted to make, wasn't it, Larry, that we need to be very thoughtful about how we gather the data, who is involved in gathering and interpreting it, and then who gets to know what the results were and to implement them.
I agree totally. I think that when I was working with the Navajo Nation, that was one of the things that we jealously guarded. That we want to make sure that whatever data, whatever studies are being done is ours. It is ours. And that this is something that is about our people, and we want to be involved in the interpretation of that data, because you'll be looking at it from one particular angle. We have a different view on what's happening with those numbers that you're now compiling and aggregating. And so it's really important. It's really in some of the federal agencies that we work with in Indian country, that the data that we put into the systems that they ask us to do, we can't get it back, and it's difficult. And so, like, for example, when I went to a physician here in New Mexico, I saw the doctor, and when I was looking at my chart a few weeks later, they said I was Caucasian. And I'm going, when did that happen? I must be Irish or German or something, but I had to correct them. So in terms of the validity of the data that we get, sometimes be careful, analyze it carefully, and make sure that you have a word in that whole process.
Larry and Jeff, hi. We could listen to you we have so much more that you guys could cover, but we are almost out of time. And I'm just wondering if we'd like to open it up at all before we end.
That's fine with me.
Okay. One of the comments in the chat, Andrea says that our data is our intellectual property.
Yeah, I saw that, and I agree. It's part of community ownership, program ownership, and in many ways, cultural ownership. So I very much agree. It's an intellectual property, and other people do not have automatic rights to it. And so I very much appreciate that perspective.
And I agree. And I think that's a whole part of this whole process called appropriation that's been happening around the country lately. And it also ties back into tribal sovereignty. It's our data, it's ours. So I agree with the commenter.
It's been a very fascinating discussion. You learn a lot about all your experiences together, fighting big battles and winning with a perspective of abundance rather than deficit. I really like that approach. Drea asks, do you have more resources on creating a problem-solving protocol?
Actually, I do, Becky, and with your help, I can share some of that with you, and that can be shared with maybe in a follow-up correspondence with our participants. The problem-solving protocols that I prefer are those that are cooperative in nature. In other words, those that are affected by it, those who have knowledge, those who have experience related to the problem are involved in the process. It's not just the job of the top person in a group to do that. And so it's a cooperative process. And it is based on fact and principle. You do want to get opinions, you do want to get creative ideas, but you need to start with a basis of fact and principle. And that's where the values come into play. And that's where factual information comes into play. And if the leader, maybe the program manager, the convener of the problem solving, can get everybody to share openly but respectfully, can base their opinions on fact and principle, openly share, and then take their hands off of the ideas and offer them to the group so that the group itself can just grow and build upon them. That is the core of the process that I like to teach. But I'd be glad to share some materials with you that NICOA can share with the group.
Kayla will post the recording and the PowerPoint for this presentation, and whatever resources you'd like to share, we can also put those up as well. And we are going to also have a survey that you will receive as soon as we end the webinar. So please take a look and fill that out for us. Did you want to make any closing comments before we wrap up?
I just want to say to all who have been listening in and watching us now, we're not gone, so we don't know everything. That's, I think, what I want to start with is that we have 40 some years of experience dealing with a variety of different issues in our lifetime in the field as managers, as directors of programs. And so what we have shared with you are some of the things that we have dealt with and how we look at things. And maybe at times we get a little too philosophical, but I think philosophy is what makes things happen. If you don't have a philosophy, you have no idea where you're going. You have no idea why you're doing it. And so for us, it has been an opportunity to share with you stories, practical ideas, and the world that we live in and how we adjust to that world. And hopefully that this is something that's been helpful to all of you. And we appreciate you listening in. Thank you all very much. Yeah.
I also thank all of you, and thank you, Larry, for involving me and Becky and the whole NICOA team. And for sure, this has been a journey of the heart for me. I'm willing to continue to share and collaborate with you, Larry, and with your team on sharing ideas and so on with the community out there who have joined us. So thank you, and best wishes to all.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.